Welcome in, everyone. I'm the real John, and I'm not gonna lie, 2024 was the pits. I think the only thing keeping it from being the worst year on record for me personally is that at least I wasn't assaulted on my job like I was in 2019. Long story. But even then, last year I lost my cat of 6 years to bad health. I was a complete emotional wreck who struggled to get anything made the whole year, and I specifically ended up shelving my third anniversary video because it was taking over 6 months to make and still wasn't done. Meanwhile, the world around us continues to spiral into hell at top speed with no signs of stopping or slowing down for a second. So, how was your year? It's not like this year started out much better. Between recurring sicknesses, continued depression over the state of things, and just endless technical problems trying to do fancier things with my PNG through programs like VideoTube and using AirPods Pro in conjunction with a MacBook Pro and GarageBand. Because why would Apple make it easy for their own products to work together? But even with a bad year like 2024 was, we still had a good batch of movies come out. And for this year's top and bottom list, I wanted to do something a little different. Last January, I watched Corey from Double Toasted give his best movies of 2023, not as a numbered list, but as a sort of superlative list, like most underrated or one other people liked but I didn't. They weren't tiered in any way, but given as a general array of what he liked the most that year. And honestly, I kind of like that idea way more. Having a ranked list is a tradition at this point in reviewer circles, but I think having a general collection of movies to highlight instead of ranking removes the process of actually calculating what movie you like more or less than the others and treats movies as what they are: art. Art is subjective. It doesn't need to be ranked or put into hierarchies of which art is better than the others. It should be shared with others, and that's what I'm going to try and do more going forward. I should add that this list isn't definitive either. Because of how bad things were this past year, I also missed out on a lot of movies, especially a lot of the awards darlings like The Substance, Conclave, and The Brutalist. If I still gave a shit about the Oscars, I'd have probably watched them before the ceremony happened to decide my own picks, but the Oscars is all just based on which studio kissed the most asses anyway, so beyond career advancement for the nominees, they don't actually matter. With all that said, welcome to Deer and Projector Lights Top Movies of 2024. Honorable Mentions. While I used to put my honorable mentions at the end of my lists in previous videos, I decided since I'm no longer going down through a numbered list anymore, then we may as well start things off with the honorable mentions. And these are mainly not featured in my list because I needed to make a cutoff somewhere. Admittedly, I'm putting these two here as honorable mentions purely out of spite. They're not particularly great or anything. In fact, they're both pretty basic and middle of the road with some decent highlights, like the Opera House scene in The Crow or the Krampus scene in Red One. And I couldn't help but get a little defensive seeing them raked over the coals by other reviewers. I felt similarly about the 2019 Lion King when it came out, mainly because I was not so nostalgically beholden to the original like most people are. The remake improved on the first movie in ways that I cared about, like the story and incorporating more Black and African descended actors in the cast, while lacking in areas where the original excelled, like animation and character design. So seeing everyone be up in arms and mad about these two movies as somehow exemplary of everything wrong in Hollywood made me want to stand up for them. Maybe it's just me, but a movie being mediocre is nowhere near the worst thing for a movie to be. I'll gladly take a middling derivative glop of a movie over something that's genuinely causing me psychic damage to watch any day of the week. I'd rather save my energy for the stuff that deserves it. In 2022, I put X and Pearl on a shared spot in my top 20 for that year because I liked them about the same amount, with just a slight edge to Pearl just because Hitchcockian Technicolor throwbacks are a lot rarer than the 70s exploitation ones. So it's a bit more novel. I was hyped for this next entry to bring things up to the 80s, and for the most part, it works. Mia Goth still nails it as the titular Maxine Minx, and the kills are excellent, with some even causing me to wince in horror when they happen. That said, it's clear that X and Pearl had the tighter writing and storytelling. Maxine attempts to include so many allusions to the 80s that it bogs itself down. Meanwhile, you can kind of tell where the plot is going and what the twist is going to be, and then by the time the movie actually gets there, it loses a lot of the momentum it had built up. Out of the three, Maxine is going to be the one I'm least likely to return to, but at the same time, it's not so bad that I didn't enjoy myself. It just had a really high bar to try and meet, and it did its best. Ooh, this was so close to making it to the list proper. I think the one thing keeping it out was just a sheer glut of good movies this year, and that it took me a bit to really get into this one. It isn't until the actual body swapping premise kicks in that it really starts cooking, and then by the end, you're left all loopy from the whole experience. It felt like a literal mind fuck. Even as an honorable mention, I still recommend people seek this out. It's got a slick style to it, the performances are excellent, and it makes great use of the body switching premise. Like, I'd go into it more, but I also don't want to spoil anything either. You gotta see it for yourself. As part of my year end catch up, I binged through the whole Beverly Hills Cop series in order to prepare for the latest entry, Axel F. Of those original three, two is my favorite entry, then one, then three. As for Axel F, I'm still debating if I put this over two or not, because it genuinely is that good of a return to form for the series. I think it also helped that, like the series has shown in the past, it's not purely propaganda and is willing to call out police corruption when it sees it, something they tackle head on in this one. I also like that Foley absolutely does not take any of the bad cops whinging about how poorly cops are treated while the dude's rocking Rolex watches and Italian leather shoes. You know who else I like? Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Dude's been off doing his own thing for so long, it feels like I haven't seen him in a movie for over a decade. Here he's a solid straight man for Murphy to bounce off of, while still also getting in his own laughs. Meanwhile, the returning straight men of the series, Judge Reinhold and John Ashton, get some interesting character development, as Reinhold's character leaves the force to uncover dirty cops, while Ashton became the new chief of police to avoid being home with his wife, a bit recurring from the previous movies. And hey, we actually get to see her on screen this time for a change. Sadly, we lost John Ashton this past year following the film's release, so he won't be with us going forward. He was such a joy throughout the series. It's not surprising that the one entry without him is the worst one. And wherever the series goes next, it's got a new high bar to cross. We'll see if it can make it. One of the year's best movies came right at the end of it. And yet, if you told me a decade ago, after a series of absolutely terrible games culminating in Rise of Lyric, that Sonic would have a legitimately good series of movies, I'd have probably died from laughing so hard. This redemption for Sonic, both in the games and in this public persona as a brand, has been wild to watch unfold. And this movie series has shown that you can make something as stupid as a Sonic movie earnestly, and people will enjoy it beyond the fandom. It's like how James Gunn is embracing the weirder parts of the DC universe, like Crypto and the Authority, for his upcoming Superman movie, and not feeling like he has to try and make comic books be taken seriously by the public. We can just embrace the goofier bits and still tell good stories with them. Do not run away from your cringe. Embrace it and be free. Anyway, Sonic 3 was really good. While primarily known as an actress and Robin Williams' daughter, Zelda Williams has been slowly making her mark as a director. She dropped her feature film debut in 2020, which sadly flew under my radar, but her sophomore effort is with a script by Juno and Jennifer Body's scribe, Diablo Cody, and it definitely caught my attention when I first saw the trailer. It's an 80s throwback with some modern edge and sensibilities, particularly in how Lisa's sister, Taffy, played excellently by Liza Sommerlin, as the tropes of this ditzy popular girl cheerleader that's so often used for the villain in high school stories, but she genuinely cares about her sister and wants her to feel accepted and doesn't want her to wind up getting in trouble or hurt. It's a good subversion of the trope. Williams also has a good visual style, taking notes from Tim Burton and John Hughes to make something that feels ripped right out of the 80s while still being its own thing. I will admit Cody's script could have probably used a few more drafts to fine tune it. It's never outright bad, but it's not as tight as her previous work. Though this would make a great double feature with Jennifer's Body. Ultimately, Lisa Frankenstein left me wanting a bit more out of the story, but what we got was still charming and fun. Every so often, Adam Sandler reminds us that he can actually act pretty decently. Granted, his bad movies are more so that his friends can keep their SAG insurance, but that doesn't exactly make the works much better to watch. Anyway, here we have a very low key but still solid performance from Sandler in what is probably the most Czech movie that came out last year. Not just that it was based on a Czech novel, it's centered around a series of Czech characters and the Czech government, and also features a giant bug like the most well-known piece of Czech literature. But the tone of the movie, the themes of loneliness and bureaucratic indifference, it's all very in line with Czech stories. I bring this up mainly because part of my dad's side of the family came from what is now Czechia, and I only got bits and pieces of the culture growing up. My parents are about third or fourth generation immigrants, so by that point, my family had basically integrated and took on American traits and traditions. All that I really get of the old country, as it were, is certainly holiday dishes like kalachki or punchkis. So when I get the opportunity to learn or experience Czech culture and history, I take it. It's like rebuilding a connection to a distant relative. Aside from the checkiness of the movie, Spaceman is also just a nice little mood piece, a contemplation on life, our choices, and our place in the universe. Unless you're arachnophobic, in which case you won't be able to contemplate anything besides, there's a giant fucking spider! In which case, it's perfectly okay to skip this one. Though I will say Paul Dano's voice is unrecognizable as said spider between his performance and the vocal effects. He's really good. Amination. Our first category is the movies what where they make the drawings move. Animations. I've always been a fan of animation. I was one of the many Disney kids of the 90s, but that also expanded into the other forms as I got older. Anime, stop motion, claymation, 3D, big budget studio or independent. I'm a sucker for good animation. And these are the animated movies I liked the most from last year. Man, we had basically this full decade of stinkers when it came to the Transformers movies. Bay's plenty capable of making good movies, but he was not the right fit for the Transformers. That said, he's remained on as a producer for the movies following his directorial departure, and that's allowed for some better movies, ones more in line with the IP. Bumblebee was good. I thought Rise of the Beast was pretty good. And this past year, the Transformers returned to full animation on the big screen for quite possibly their best movie yet. Focusing on the origins of Optimus and Megatron, Transformers 1 shows us a Cybertron before the war between Autobots and Decepticons, one under the boot heel of an invading force, and in their hopes to free Cybertron, the bots who become Optimus and Megatron have a cold reality check that sends them down in completely different paths. Megatron giving in to his anger so much that he only wishes to destroy Cybertron's past so that it can have a better future. And Optimus wanting to rid Cybertron of any tyrannical forces, be they extraterrestrial or Cybertronian. What's incredible is not only is Transformers 1 a good prequel story that covers a bit of franchise history that's never really made it to the big screen, it managed to have its celebrity voice cast actually work. I mean, Scarlett Johansson and Keegan Michael Key are basically typecast for their characters, but they still do a good job. Meanwhile, Chris Hemsworth manages to pull off both the passionate yet reckless Orion Pax, as well as the strong, compassionate Optimus Prime. His Optimus voice feels in the same vein as Peter Cullen's iconic voice, while still very clearly being Hemsworth. Like, if Hemsworth wanted to keep on voicing Optimus, I think he could do it, but they're all blown out of the water by Brian Tyree Henry. Not sure how much of a household name he is, but he's a prolific actor, and he'll show up later on in this list too. And here he shows he's a fantastic voice actor. His transformation from D16 into Megatron over the course of the movie is a masterclass in voice acting. And when we get to his Megatron voice, it's almost seamless from the iconic voice Frank Welker gave the character. Now, you want to talk about somebody who could keep voicing a character. Henry could absolutely continue to voice Megatron, and you'd get no complaints from me. I think where the movie fell short for me was in its goofiness. I actually really liked the plot here, especially when we stay focused on Optimus and Megatron. So when it leans more into the comedy, particularly with Keegan Michael Key's Bumblebee, I feel like it undercuts itself. That said, I also recognize that demanding this literal toy commercial take itself more seriously is also how we ended up with 10 years of the Bayformers. So I'll take the unbalanced tone of a good movie rather than the overly serious tone of a bad one. As someone who works in a library, it's been impossible for me to get a copy of this book. Digital, physical, every copy I have access to has been checked out, with many of them having holds for when they get returned. Which, hey, tells you how popular the story is in the wake of the movie coming out. I wouldn't call this era of DreamWorks its renaissance, mainly because there's only been two 10 out of 10 movies to come out of this era, and the rest kind of vary in quality. Compare that to Disney's Renaissance, where 90% of that output was all bangers. Still, DreamWorks has been putting out some of their best work lately, namely the Puss in Boots sequel and this movie. Of course, it's kind of cheating when you're bringing back Chris Sanders to direct. The dude gave us Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. His one dud is The Croods, which isn't even bad, it's just okay. Having Sanders adapt the story was basically guaranteeing it to be good. The story, if you haven't seen the movie or read the book, deals with a robot assistant who mistakenly lands on an uninhabited island, or rather, uninhabited by people. The robot is on the island long enough to learn the language of the native animals, but struggles to execute its programming until it inadvertently lands on a goose nest and one of the eggs hatches and imprints on her. Her programming then adjusts to caring for the gosling to ensure it's able to migrate with its flock by fall. What you catch early on about the story is the themes of found family. The robot, dubbed Roz, finds various animal families when she lands on the island, but it's when she takes on the parenting duties for the gosling that she ends up adding a fox into the mix, and that as time goes on, more animals begin to think of Roz as something other than the monster, until eventually Roz becomes a welcome figure on the island. To the point where there's genuine sadness at the idea of her having to return to her manufacturer to essentially be rebooted. Which leads to the other theme of the movie: people's perceptions and expectations of you. Roth is not only perceived as a monster by the animals on the island, her deviating from her programming while on the island makes her a target of her parent company, who expect her to act as they designed her. Meanwhile, her adopted son Bright Bill is not only perceived as weird from being raised by the monster, but because he's a runt, he's constantly treated like he's not good enough. At least until the Goose Flock Elder points out that if nature had run its course, Bright Bill wouldn't have survived. It's through Roz's intervention that he was not only able to survive, but thrive. On top of the great storytelling, the animation is just gorgeous. Some of the best to come out of DreamWorks to date. Just a visually stunning experience that you can't really get out of live action. Although I'm sure they'll water it down anyway in a decade, because that's the new norm. Thanks, Bob Iger, you hack. If you haven't yet, do yourself a favor and seek out this movie. And if you have the chance, seek out the book too. If it's even half as good, it's gotta be delightful. I'd Adam Elliott is a very interesting filmmaker. He's a stop motion animator who mainly uses clay, but his style isn't super clean and precise as, say, Aardman or Will Vinton's claymation. Things aren't always proportional and can even be kind of wonky, but that ultimately belies its charm because that also represents the kind of character Elliott focuses on: imperfect beings, people with issues, people who may be a little off kilter or awkward. I was first introduced to Elliot through his feature length debut, Mary and Max, which took inspiration from a pen pal friendship Elliot had been keeping with someone from New York and told the story of a lonely Australian girl in the 70s befriending a 44-year-old Jewish atheist in New York through letters they'd write to each other. Both characters suffer from their own mental health struggles, Mary with agoraphobia and depression, Max with anxiety and being on the autism spectrum, though they use the now outdated term Asperger's syndrome in the movie. And despite their almost 4 decade age gap and cross planetary distance, the two managed to maintain a nice friendship through their letters. I'm still partial to that one just because a lot of Max's experiences fit with my own being autistic with anxiety and depression, but Elliot's latest movie has a lot of those same darkly humorous touches. This one, Memoir of a Snail, takes parts of Elliot's childhood as a young gay man growing up in Australia in the 70s and 80s, as well as his desire to animate, and splits the experiences into twin characters: Grace and Gilbert Puddle, spelled Pudel. After their father, a paraplegic former street performer from France, dies in their childhood, the twins are set to opposite sides of Australia. Grace to a pair of inattentive New Age swingers in Canberra, Gilbert to a fundamentalist Christian family farm in Perth. The great thing about Eliot's style is, despite the story being fictional and only taking inspiration from his life, enough of it is as based in reality that it still feels like a true story. He's able to have just the right details for people to attach to, like how Grace meets her husband because he wants to show off his new leaf blower, or that she met her longtime friend Pinky because Pinky was putting library books in the trash can next to the book drop. It's little touches like that that hook the audience into your story, little touches of realism that differentiate it from the more stylized storytelling we get in films. What also sets Elliot's style apart is that, due to a physiological tremor, his clay figures and animation have this unevenness about them, the aforementioned wonkiness. A bit like John Callahan's drawings. It's a unique style that could only really come from Elliot. And as tech bros high off cocaine and the smell of their own farts try to claim that so called generative AI is an accessibility tool for disabled people to make art, Adam Elliott's out here showing everyone you don't need that crap to make art. You just need the drive to do it, no matter your limitations. Not sure when Elliott's next film will be, but be it feature length or short, I can't recommend his animation enough. Leave it to Pharrell Williams to decide to forego a traditional biographic documentary for a full on Lego movie. Pharrell was one of those names I'd hear a lot through my adolescence and young adulthood, and while his music is consistently excellent, I never really paid much attention to him or his personal life. So it came as a shock to me watching this movie that the whole Virginia Beach scene gave us not only Pharrell and the Neptunes, but also Timbaland, Missy Elliott, and Pusha T. Real talk, I only knew Pusha T by name and specifically for him dropping the bomb of Drake's literal bastard son on the world, so I thought he was just a newer name in hip hop. But the dude started out when he was a kid in the 90s. I knew about the song Rump Shaker by Rex and Effects, but I didn't realize a teenage Pharrell worked on it until watching this movie. This man's been in the game for pretty much my entire life. As we follow Pharrell's life, we're shown a very imaginative and creative boy with a passion for music, seeing that passion break him into the industry, and then the traditional rise and fall. As it was around 2013 when Blurred Lines came out that Pharrell was hitting peak excess, both personal and professional. And it was only through self reflection and reconnecting with his family that he's able to come back with, of all things, the theme to Despicable Me, Happy. The thing with so many musician stories is they often hit the exact same beats, the rise, fall, redemption arc. And while this does that as well, you never really feel it trite or hackneyed, mainly because Pharrell and the other talking heads are able to retell what happened interestingly, and also the Lego visuals allow them to be way more creative with it than just relying on stock or archival footage. Speaking of Lego, this movie proves they could be doing so much more with Lego filmmaking than just family action adventure comedies. Not that the Lego movies we've had are bad, but they're limited to the same genre. What this shows that Lego can be used to tell all kinds of stories. I think the best bit about using Lego for this was how they got away with bringing up smoking weed by using PG spray. That and apparently Lego not only custom built the celebrities being interviewed, like Snoop Dogg, Jay Z, Pusha T, Timbaland, Busta Rhymes, Justin Timberlake, and Gwen Stefani, but also a wider array of skin tones and hair pieces to accommodate more BIPOC in Lego form. Pharrell's quite the figure in music and pop culture. There really is nobody else quite like him. But seriously, Lego, we need you to start up Lego Studios and let people make movies with Lego. Adaptations of classic works, remakes of old movies with the original audio, entirely new IPs. The world needs this, Lego. Luckiest Busters. One thing about me compared to other movie reviewers and critics is that I was never averse to big budget studio productions. While the corporatization and conglomeration of Hollywood studios is just subsidiaries to even bigger companies has done terrible damage to the industry, that doesn't mean good movies can't manage to find a way out of them. So these are the big budget blockbuster movies that really busted my blocks. As much as people continue to grow tired of studios only ever relying on recognizable IPs with endless sequels and remakes, and rightfully so, as that's a creatively bankrupt decision made by bean counters and not filmmakers, I still posit that even within this shithole of a late stage capitalist nightmare, there's still fantastic movies you could make in spite of that. Case in point, the current Planet of the Apes series that started with Rise of the Planet of the Apes and focused on the origins of Caesar. While Caesar may have passed on, the apes only ever continued to rise. Unfortunately, without a real heir apparent for Caesar, the apes have since divided into separate tribes, as many humans who suffered from the viral pandemic that started in Caesar's time have reverted back to more primitive mannerisms. More ape than human, if you will. This time around, we follow Noah and his clan of chimps that have learned to tame eagles through falconry. The night before he and his friends are supposed to undergo a rite of passage, Noah's village is attacked by apes on horseback. His father murdered, his clan kidnapped, and him left for dead. What follows is a good old fashioned story of revenge, as Noah makes his way to the titular kingdom under the self appointed heir of Caesar, Proximus, holding up outside of an old human bunker by a beach. Noah's joined by an orangutan named Raka, who knows of the old ways under Caesar and tries to share them with Noah, and May, a human who's not as feral as she first appears. It's also through Noah and May's interactions that the film rightfully raises the question of, do humans really need to be in charge again? Especially when Noah finds old children's books depicting apes being in zoo cages. Admittedly, I have heard some people come out of this saying they hated the movie, and that's kind of fair. Andy Serkis as Caesar really kept that trilogy of movies together and made it compelling. So trying to move forward in the story without him, like in the movie itself, leaves a big gap and nothing really quite fills it in. However, I still found it a good watch. The ape effects still look great, and the time jump forward allows us to see the beginnings of what could come to be in the original Planet of the Apes movie. Besides, it's hard to screw up classic revenge and coming of age stories. I have no idea what's in store next, though this movie is set to kick off a second trilogy, presumably following Noah's story, with Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, the writing duo behind the Caesar trilogy, slated to have their own trilogy of movies after that. We'll see what all comes of this, cause long-term franchise plans can always fall through, but I'm still on board for this ride. For now. Admittedly, if you're looking for the madness of Fury Road or the previous Mad Max movies, that's still here, but the tone is much different. Fury Road maintains the trappings of the exploitation genre this series is known for, while Furiosa is aiming higher. It takes on airs of prestige, becoming almost Shakespearean in its approach. Granted, that description makes it sound like this movie's up its own ass, but unlike other failed attempts at sci fi or fantasy prestige like Jupiter Ascending, Miller is able to tap into these more classical elements without ever really stepping away from the fact that this is still a B movie at heart. What helps is this cast works perfectly. While Morton Joe's actor sadly passed away in 2020, the actor playing this younger version still captures that menace, that cold demeanor that says, I'm in control whenever he's in the room. Meanwhile, Anya Taylor Joy fits right in as a younger Furiosa, never even looking out of place or feeling separate from Charlize's version of the character. The real standout, however, is Chris Hemsworth as the main antagonist, Dementis, the warlord who first kidnaps Furiosa. Through the movie, we see just how much of a bastard Dementis is, especially towards Furiosa. And all the while, we can't wait to see how she'll finally put him in his place. And Hemsworth is absolutely eating up the scenery. He's what really keeps us remembering this is a B movie, because he is a B movie villain in the best ways possible. In the same way that Immortan Joe was in Fury Road or Lord Humongous was in The Road Warrior, this is honestly some of Hemsworth's best work, giving us a character just as iconic as his Thor. Sadly, while the film did get a lot of praise from audiences and critics alike, it really only managed to make back its budget and break even, not give the infinite growth numbers Hollywood demands. So Miller will probably never get the chance to make the other prequel he wants to do, centering on the titular Mad Max himself. But hey, if this is where Miller ends the Mad Max saga, it was one hell of a ride. At least until Hollywood does some shitty reboot after he dies and fucks it all up. Look, I fully admit I'm a sucker for kaiju movies, particularly Godzilla, so it should be no surprise that the latest entry in the Monsterverse found its way onto this list. It should also come as no surprise that this was also my movie of the year for a few weeks before getting knocked down a couple of slots. As I've said before, the Monsterverse movies know exactly how to push the right buttons in my stupid monkey brain to make the happy chemicals come out. And here we have embraced true Showa era nonsense. King Kong gets a power glove, Godzilla gets a rose form, and our villain is evil Lanky Kong with a spinal column as a whip with a blade at the end while riding atop a giant ice dragon. This movie is pure slamming action figures together, and I am here for it. Honestly, I kind of prefer this over Godzilla vs. Kong. I think with GVK, I was let down by the Millie Bobby Brown subplot, and the humans weren't as good, or at least as interesting, as they were in King of Monsters. But GXK cut out the superfluous human characters and focused more on the monsters themselves. There are whole sections of the movie with no dialogue, focusing just on Kong, and those were some of the best parts of the movie. Like, no joke, they could probably make a movie that's just about Kong without any human characters, or at least minimal human characters, and it could be the best in the franchise. So yeah, big shock that the movie of kaiju toys being slammed together made my brain make the happy chemicals. I never said I was a role model. Also, happy 70th birthday, Big G. Here's to many more years to come. I never became a full-on theater kid TM, mainly because my mom was pretty adamant that I should treat entertainment as, quote, an avocation, or something I do on the side and not the main focus of my time and energy. That said, I was still very involved in theater through high school and college, and I was starting to get into theater right when Wicked was hitting Broadway and becoming the biggest show yet for the theater community. It was so big, there were constant talks of eventual movie adaptations, with some talented artists showing it would work perfectly for a traditionally animated Disney musical. Well, that was sadly no longer in the cards following Disney's complete shift to 3D computer animation, and the rest of Hollywood already going in that direction. The talks of a film version were always bandied about, but nothing ever really came of it until now. Not only were we getting an adaptation, but it was a two-parter with each act of the show now getting its own feature film. Directed by John M. Chu, whose track record is not the worst I've seen. I mean, I thought his direction on In the Heights was good, even if the movie never really hooked me. But yeah, between the very corporately calculated splitting of the movie into multiple parts and just one of the weirdest off kilter marketing campaigns I've ever seen in recent years, when you actually sit down and watch the movie Wicked, it's magnificent. Genuinely, it has been years, if not decades, since a movie adaptation of musical has worked this well. It maintains elements of its stage origins while making great use of the film's three-dimensional space and a blockbuster budget. While this is just Act 1, it fleshes out and really builds up a story that is not subtle with its message of a con artist ruler using, in this case literally, scapegoats to appease the masses.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
It's also not subtle about how absolutely gay things are between Elphaba and Glinda. Admittedly, I was a wee babby asexual when the show premiered in 2003, so I never picked up on it before, but here you can almost smell it. Of course, that leads us to the fact that Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were pretty much perfectly cast for these roles. Ariana really gets to show off her comedic timing, something that's always been a part of her repertoire, but that she's never really had much chance to give people outside of like hosting SNL. And Cynthia almost single handedly carries the movie as its emotional center, with so much of the BIPOC and general marginalized person's experience and how people act around her and treat her. It especially hits hard in the cases where Elphaba is rightfully pissed off, but can't express it without her magic causing things to break around her, leading people to treat her as this dangerous emotional wreck that needs to be told to calm down. Something I'm sure no women, especially women of color, have had to deal with in their lives, he said sarcastically. As great as their two leads are, that doesn't overshadow how good the supporting cast is here. Jonathan Bailey of Bridgerton fame completely hits the nail on the head for the love interest for both Elphaba and Glinda, Prince Fiero, who's basically the big dumb rich guy at first, but as the story goes on, he shares Elphaba's emotional depth and distaste for the more fascistic changes happening in Oz. Meanwhile, Broadway's own SpongeBob SquarePants, Ethan Slater, works great as the hapless Munchkin Bach. Disabled actress Marissa Bode shines in her big screen debut as the very put upon younger sister of Elphaba, Nessa Rose, not to mention the iconic Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum as Madame Morrible and the Wizard, respectively, and a very well played voice performance by Peter Dinklage as Dr. Dillamond, the outspoken goat professor at Shiz. I honestly didn't even recognize him. Really, the only complaint I have against this movie is Yo, to an extent Dinklage, though he handles it a little bit better, don't quite have the singing voices to handle their songs. They end up more sing-talking through their numbers. Goldblum handles his a bit better thanks to his past as a jazz singer. No kidding, even has a few albums under his belt too. At the same time, it's hard to really notice or care about any lesser singing performances, as the acting performances are great, selling the emotional meaning of the lyrics even if they aren't hitting the notes. Now, I say this all with the caveat that the second half could absolutely eat it when it comes out. It's happened before, especially with the attempts to split up movies into multiple parts or make everything a trilogy in the past 2 decades plus. We wait a whole year or two for that finale to come out, and it just tanks the whole endeavor and every bit of goodwill the audience had built up. Not saying that I expect the same to happen here, but I'm saying Wicked's second half is where they really gotta nail it, and they've already got big silver slippers to fill. You're in for a scare. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of horror as a genre, mainly because it's often the cheapest and laziest one for people looking to make a quick buck, but that also helps the highest quality ones stand out all the better. Here were my favorite scary movies from last year. I'm not sure how much interest people still have in this series, but I think it's still fantastic. I think what helps is that, for the most part, the focus isn't on the monsters themselves, but the human characters trying to survive. That's really what makes any good post apocalypse story worth anything. This time around, we shift from upstate New York to the Big Apple itself, and how the city that never sleeps was not equipped for these creatures to strike. We see it through the eyes of Samira, a hospice patient who's at the point where she just lost any fucks to give and just wants to return to her old home in Harlem to get pizza from her favorite spot and just call it a life. As the monsters arrive and start attacking, Sam breaks away from the crowds trying to escape Manhattan with her service cat, Frodo,
I get it.
inadvertently picking up a straggler, Eric, who came over from England to New York to study law. Eric follows Sam as he isn't sure what else he can do given his life plans were already falling apart even before the aliens showed up. So he decides to help Sam achieve her goal. Like with the previous two movies, we don't really have that big of a cast. We get a return of Jimon Hansu's character from part two, as we see him at the same marionette show Sam's hospice care center is attending before Sam splits off on her own. But the bulk of this movie is just Lupita Nyong'o with the cat until Joseph Quinn shows up. And honestly, the two of them do really well, even as they have to stay quiet or run for their lives from these creatures. More than a monster movie, A Quiet Place Day One is about a character really coming to terms with her mortality and what her life meant. I don't know how much more they can wring out of this premise, but it seems like they have a good sense not to worry about explaining the aliens and just keeping them as this existential threat while we focus more on the humans. So long as that stays the case, this series might actually not see any outright terrible entries. I will admit I was not as into the first Smile as everyone else. Oh, I enjoyed it, absolutely, but I also was hoping for more out of it. It felt like the good starting point for an even better movie, and I was not wrong about that. Smile 2 takes the foundation set up in the first movie and dials it up to 11. Instead of just regular everyday people dealing with this demonic entity, we've got a pop star trying to make a comeback, which makes her ripe for this demon to terrorize. The filmmakers here play all kinds of mind games, both with the character and the audience. There are points where you have to stop and question just how much of what you saw was real, and Naomi Scott absolutely sells every second of it. You know what else she sells? Her being a pop star. If you don't recognize the name, Scott is probably best known as the live action Jasmine from Aladdin, as well as Kimberly in the Power Rangers movie, and the new recruit character from the Charlie's Angels reboot. She's not quite a household name yet, but she's definitely got the talent to be, and for playing a fictional pop star here, the songwriting and musical and stage production work makes her feel like one. The only real concern I had after seeing this movie was where do they go from here? No spoilers, but I genuinely am curious how exactly to move forward with the story after that ending. Whatever comes next, Parker Finn has promised more off the rails thrill rides, so I'm here for it. Sadly prescient biopic. So, an election happened this past year, and it was a complete shit show. While she ended up losing, Kamala Harris was still the first woman of color to lead a major party ticket in US history. And part of the progress to get us there was in this sadly prescient biopic. Admittedly, Shirley Chisholm is one of those iconic figures I'd heard about but never really knew. I think so much of the focus on Black history growing up was centered on MLK and the civil rights movement that later figures like Chisholm never get a lot of attention, at least in schools and whatnot. Which sucks because if she's anything like she's shown here, the woman was a national treasure. Centering specifically on Chisholm's 1972 presidential run for the Democratic primary, Shirley shows us an absolutely firecracker of a personality. The kind that does not like taking no or wait your turn for an answer. Perfect example, the film opens with Chisholm fighting with her own party leader and Speaker of the House, Massachusetts Representative John McCormick, over being placed on the Agricultural Committee when she was from and represented Brooklyn. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have anything to do with agriculture and was basically assigned the position as a low rung on the ladder. She wasn't moved to a more appropriate committee and basically got a lesson early on about just how much of a goddamn boys' club the Capitol is. What follows was her inspirational, albeit chaotic, campaign for the Democratic nominee for president. For context, this was an already crowded field in the hopes of beating Nixon, and Chisholm had only served 2 terms in the House. Her opponents were pretty much all old white men, barring one other sadly unmentioned pioneer, Patsy Mink of Hawaii, whose story of being the first Asian American woman to run for a presidential nominee honestly would make a powerful companion piece to this movie. If I, just from looking into the facts about it. Though, like Chisholm, Mink struggled to garner enough support, and she ended up dropping out of the race before the '72 convention. Shirley, meanwhile, fought all the way to the convention in Miami, only to get stabbed in the back by more prominent black Democrats who switched over to support South Dakota Senator George McGovern for the promise of cabinet positions. In the end, Shirley's campaign was the longest of long shots, but as the movie shows, It wasn't all about getting the nomination. It was also about bringing the people's voices forward, having a platform for those who felt unheard. And in a way, she served as a precursor to what Bernie Sanders did with his runs for president. Bernie never got the nod either, but his campaign at least drove the conversation forward and proved that progressive policies could resonate with people. And I'd like to think Shirley's campaign did much of the same. Not the Democrats ever learned that lesson. Now, with biopics, it's always hard to tell how much of the truth made it to the screen without being familiar with the subject. But from what I could tell, this was mostly on the up and up. There weren't any wholesale made up characters or events like in, say, Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, which is more like fanfic than biopic. And the cast here are all excellent, with Megan Good absolutely disappearing into her role as Shirley Chisholm. Not to mention, this had one of Lance Reddick's final performances before his untimely passing, and as per usual, he's just fantastic. Not all inspirational stories end in victory. Sometimes the treasure really is the friends you make along the way. And in Shirley's case, it's the young people disenfranchised by the system you inspire to get in the fight with you. And I hope if you decide to check this out, it inspires you to do the same. Not bad for a first try. One of the rare instances in Hollywood is to have your feature film debut as a director, be you an outsider coming in or an insider moving up, just knock it out of the park. This year we managed to have two in that particular that stood out to me. As actors get more time in the industry, it's not unusual for them to expand their skill set and try other jobs within production, more often than not, trying their hands at writing and directing. So it goes that we have Dev Patel here delivering his writing and directorial debut film, Monkey Man, a story he initially pitched to Neil Blomkamp before Neil said, "You're really passionate about this idea? Why don't you direct it?" Granted, Neil partly said that because he didn't feel comfortable as an Afrikaner telling a very Indian story, but it's good that Neil recognizes his limitations. The basics of the story here are that of a young Indian boy seeking revenge for the destruction of his village and assault and murder of his mother. Except that it isn't until the boy learns to fight more than just for his own anger that he begins to succeed against his enemies. So a bit as a superhero movie, Patel's character is much more in line with John Wick. And Patel takes a lot of inspiration from Wick and the various inspirations that led to John Wick. The action is kinetic and vibrant, making great use of the camera and lighting. It's all very brutal, never really shying away from the blood, bruises, and broken bones the characters endure. More than anything, Patel wanted to tell a uniquely Indian story. The imagery, the themes, the set pieces, they're all deeply rooted in India, from ancient times to present day. The movie serves as a commentary on the colossal wealth disparity between the castes and how abjectly wealthy are living right next to the destitute, and nobody bats an eye. It's a commentary on the rising fascism, particularly of Narendra Modi's Hindu National Party, and how they need to be challenged and stopped from hurting people. It's also a commentary on how the wealthy and powerful use religion and spirituality to harass, subjugate, and even execute people in their way, and especially how the police are no help as they're just the corrupt foot soldiers of the wealthy. There's also this whole community of Hijra Patel's character befriends in the movie. Hijra being a gender classification in Southern Asia that includes trans, intersex, and eunuch people. And they show up at the end to help kick ass with Indian metal band Bloodywood playing in the background, and it's absolutely glorious. That said, the movie does have some issues too. As Patel was very passionate about telling the story, he has a tendency to overindulge at points. He'll drag moments along to focus on certain visuals, sometimes to the point where he ends up reusing a visual motif without adding to it or the story. The best example of this is the flashbacks to Boy's village being destroyed. Yeah, the character doesn't really have a name beyond Boy, but Patel is far from the worst abuser of that trope, so no big deal there. Him flashing back to his traumatic moment makes sense for his character, but he does it so often that it can derail the movie for a bit, and as we take a detour to visit the past without really meaning anything for the present. But hey, that's ultimately more of a personal preference of mine than a slight against the movie itself. Whether or not we get more movies from writer director Dev Patel remains to be seen. But if nothing else, his first outing showed a lot of promise and gave us a movie you don't see every day, at least stateside. So Good on you, Dev. This one I caught towards the end of 2024, and boy, for a directorial debut, Anna Kendrick knocked it out of the park. This movie was actually based on a script from The Blacklist. For those unaware of it, this producer named Franklin Leonard decided to survey the various production studios and producers of Hollywood for the scripts that they liked the most but haven't been made yet. And filmmakers could take a look at them and hopefully get them made, or other studio heads could take a look at them and give it a shot. Other Blacklist scripts include Argo, American Hustle, Slumdog Millionaire, Juno, Hell or High Water, Spotlight, and The King's Speech. The script in particular was featured as far back as 2017. And it wasn't until 2021 that Netflix bought the script with Anna Kendrick just intending to star in it, but they pulled out before the production could begin. Netflix then regained the distribution rights after the movie premiered at TIFF, so apparently they just didn't want to foot the bill for making the thing. But hey, the weird juggling between production houses allowed for Kendrick to step up to the role of producer and then director of the film, in the process donating her pay to the organizations RAIN and NCVC, something she felt better than profiting off of the gruesome nature of this story. Speaking of that story, I'm not going to get into any details, but be forewarned if you haven't watched the movie yet, content warning for these topics if they're triggering to you. You see, this movie is a fictionalized retelling of the actual time a serial killer got onto the 70s relationship game show, The Dating Game, and the movie cuts between said serial killer, Rodney Alcala, committing those murders, and Kendrick's character, Cheryl Bradshaw, taking part in the taping of the episode that featured Alcala as a contestant. More than anything, Kendrick showcases how terrifying so many women feel around men, particularly the kinds of men who do pose as a threat to them, and how the systems we have in place never really take those concerns seriously until it's way too late. The movie makes this part clear, but in reality as well, Alcala had already been arrested and served time for the content warning actions back in 1968, and despite the fact that he was a flight risk, he was allowed to leave Los Angeles by his parole officer in 1977, and he wasn't rearrested until 1979, by which time he had his dating game appearance. And four girls and women between the ages of 12 and 31 were murdered by him, with one 15-year-old able to escape him and eventually providing testimony at his criminal trial. Said 15-year-old is one of the victims shown in the movie. As gruesome as the material is, Kendrick shows a deftness in handling it that many directors would fumble. In the hands of a lesser director, this subject would have been too poorly done to take seriously, or too gruesome and come off as completely distasteful and exploitive. Kendrick keeps the point of view solely on Alcala's victims, and Cheryl, as the taping leads to her and Alcala going out for drinks afterwards, followed by one of the tensest scenes put to film of Cheryl being followed back to her car by Alcala. The scariest thing is this is not an unusual feeling for many people, particularly young women. Kendrick is able to encapsulate that fear, that dread of not knowing if you'll be able to make it out alive, as well as that feeling that nobody else cares or is willing to help. While not visually gruesome, Kendrick's first foray as a director gave us a movie that is well crafted and executed, but you really need to be in the right headspace to watch and deal with that kind of display of trauma. Makes me very curious to see what kind of film she'll make next. Underdogs! These movies are the ones that never got that much attention from audiences at large, but I thought deserved it, and hopefully after this, you'll give them a chance too. Man, this movie did not get any love at the box office. Hopefully, people take a chance on it now that it's on video and streaming, because I thought it was a hoot. I can't speak for how it works as a retelling of the show The Fall Guy, or if it even has that much to do with the show, or this is just another case of we have this pre existing IP, just use the name, just to get the damn thing made. But in terms of an action comedy, I thought this nailed it. For one thing, I love Gosling in this movie. Following his killer work as Ken and Barbie, which feels weird to say out loud, but that's where we are in this timeline. Gosling carries that himbo energy over to this movie as a stunt actor who leaves the business after a stunt gone bad, only to be recruited back in order to help out an A list actor he used to do stunts for. What it entails is an absolute love letter to stuntcraft, showcasing an entire array of different types of stunts over the course of the movie, from parkour to fights on moving vehicles, and just all kinds of explosions. Which isn't too surprising, since David Leitch got his start as a stunt performer along his John Wick co creators, Chad Stahelski. Admittedly, the writing is probably the weakest link the movie has. I mean, it's not prestige level writing. In fact, a lot of the story beats and dialogue are pretty basic. But then that wasn't the goal of the movie, as much as making a tribute to the art of the movie's stunt was. And on those terms, I think it more than succeeded. A title like Boy Kills Worlds kind of says everything you need to know on the tin. It's taking a very tongue in cheek tone and does not shy away from its violence. What I didn't expect was how much this movie would hit all of those happy hormone buttons in my brain. One thing about me as I've gotten older is I love it when a movie just goes outside of the box and does crazy stuff. The weirder and further out in left field you go, the more likely you'll keep my attention. It's why I love things like the Daniels' two movies, Swiss Army Man and Everything Everywhere All at Once. If you're willing to go nuts, I'm more likely to join you. What we have here is a movie steeped in B movie tropes, pulling a lot from Hong Kong and Korean style revenge movies, with some additional inspiration from video games and anime as well. And it keeps itself serious enough to sell you on the premise and having the humor based in hyperbole, almost to the point of full on parody of the tropes of this genre. Which tracks since the movie was produced by Sam Raimi, a veteran in bringing violent and comedic B movies to the screen. As the title implies, the bread and butter of this movie is the absolutely vicious violence and gore on display. Another staple of Raimi's, actually. And not only is the fight choreography excellent, it's sold so well by Bill Skarsgård without even saying a word. The man has got this crazy career, playing Pennywise, Eric Draven, and Count Orlok, making appearances in movies from Allegiant to Anna Karenina to Deadpool 2 to Eternals. I almost wonder if there's anything this guy can't do. Of course, with Skarsgård playing a mute, someone has to provide a voice for his character. The Mad Lads went and made it Archer himself, H. John Benjamin. While he may not be a household name, his voice has become iconic through his work on Archer, Bob's Burgers, even going as far back as Home Movies and Dr. Katz. Here, because Skarsgård's character's last memory as a child was playing an arcade game with his sister, the game announcer's voice, played by Benjamin, became his inner monologue. He basically made his inner thoughts voiced by a fighting game announcer. And yet, this works because the movie never undercuts that choice. It plays itself seriously in the right ways to make it work. On top of Skarsgård and Benjamin, the cast is rounded out with Jessica Rothe as the helmeted assassin June 27, Michelle Dockery, Brett Gelman, and Charlton Copley as the mini bosses of the villainous family, Andrew Koji as a member of the resistance fighting the family who helps our hero out along the way, Yayan Ruhian as this abusive shaman who trains our hero to fight, and Famke Janssen as the head of this villain family and the final boss, or so our hero thinks. As good as the two parts to our protagonist are, the supporting cast is just as good, keeping that same energy and taking themselves seriously and letting the hyperbole of the world around them be funny for them. While this movie didn't get that much attention in theaters, I hope more people can discover it on streaming and home video. If you haven't yet and you think you'd enjoy a John Wick style movie played to an almost cartoonish degree, please seek this one out. Favorite movie of the year? Of course, even without fully ranking this year's list, there's still one that's gotta take the top slot. Out of everything I watched this past year, what did I like the most? In 2022, by August, I had burnt myself out from streaming 5 days a week for over a year, It wasn't so much that I wasn't getting big enough audiences or chat interactions or whatever. I was able to hit Twitch affiliate within my first year at the least. It was just not fun for me anymore. So, in the midst of that funk, I went and saw Everything Everywhere All at Once in theaters during its second run, and it absolutely blew me away. It revitalized my love for movies at a time when I really needed it. Well, in 2024, while so many terrible things kept happening to me, I ended up losing my creative drive in the process and essentially spent most of the year on hiatus trying to deal with it all. I still kept seeing movies, but more for my own personal enjoyment and out of obligation than to make reviews. And that's when I saw Deadpool and Wolverine. I am not ashamed to admit that I love the MCU. Corporate hegemony that it is, the writing just worked to hook me into the world and its characters, and by and large, the casting has been perfect as well. I've also enjoyed both Deadpool movies as they lampshade superhero movies and tropes while still reveling in them. So, with Disney's buyout of Fox, the third Deadpool movie's fate was up in the air there for a bit. Would the House of Mouse end up neutering the Merc with the mouth? Could an MCU Deadpool even work? Thankfully, those answers turned out to be respectively no and yes, surprisingly well even. Essentially, what the filmmakers for this movie did was pay tribute to the end of the 20th Century Fox era Marvel Universe. The X Men movies, the Blade movies, the Fantastic Four movies, also rans like Daredevil and Elektra, even deep cut unmade movies from that era get referenced. There's even a montage set to Good Riddance Time of Your Life by Green Day during the credits with all the behind the scenes footage from from that era of movies. Sure, in retrospect, the Fox Marvel movies had a rough run, especially by the end. But what this movie shows is similarly to how No Way Home showed with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, they could have worked if given better writing. Granted, this was more tongue in cheek than reverent, but the point still stands. More than the Fox Marvel movies, this was one last hurrah for Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. While he ended up on a great note with 2018's Logan, this movie allows us to see all those different incarnations of the character, but more importantly, pair him up with Deadpool and show that they could do a comic accurate blue and yellow costume and make it work. That what they did in the 2000s, making him wear generic black the first movie, was kind of a cop out. And that you can bring these elements from the comics into live action and it wouldn't look bad or stupid or whatever movie executives who don't even like comics thought. And on top of that, Jackman and Reynolds play off each other perfectly. Hugh slides right back into the role like he never left, and even in this more belligerent, cynical, broken version of the character, his repartee with Deadpool is incredible. As far as the MCU is concerned, thanks to the use of the TVA and the Void from the Loki series, Deadpool is pretty self contained. There's not a whole lot of continuity or crossover business to sort through, which has become a growing problem for the MCU as the longer it's gone on. The nice thing about this movie is you can come into it having seen nothing before this and still basically understand and enjoy the movie, which fits because that was one of Stan Lee's beliefs about writing for comics, that you should be able to jump in at any point and enjoy it. More importantly for me, at a time when I was struggling with everything, this movie lit a whole new fire under my ass. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once, this movie reminded me why I love talking about movies, why I love going to the theaters. I even made a little Deadpool version of myself for the first review I'd made in months to cover this movie. This movie came out right when I needed something like it the most. And while for many Wicked or The Substance or one of the many other awards darlings is their movie of the year, for me personally, it's Deadpool and Wolverine. It embraces its minority origins. It tells you to buckle up for the ride because it's going to go some fucking places. Now we just need to get Tom Holland's Spider Man in the mix for Deadpool 4, or Spider Man 4, whichever comes first. And there you have it, all of my favorite movies from 2024. I kind of like this new format. I think I'll keep it up. Stay tuned for my least favorite movies of 2024. But until then, you can find me at the movies.